What's going on out there, guys? It's your boy Tommy on the spot for Watch Along Wrestling. Thanks so much for checking out this video. Typically at this point, you'd hear a little beat drop and all that, but I'm going to withhold from all of that for this video because I wanted to, it's a little bit more of a somber video today. I didn't want to let the weekend go by without jumping on with you guys and sharing some thoughts and memories of the 15-year anniversary of the passing of Eddie Guerrero. It is crazy how much time flies and how quickly time goes. It just doesn't seem all that long ago before we were able to watch Eddie Guerrero on TV each and every week. And, you know, death of a wrestler is always tough for me. Obviously, it's one of my favorite passions in all of life. And, you know, you watch wrestling literally when you're a fan 52 weeks a year. There's no off season. So these larger-than-life characters almost feel as if they become a part of your life in a way. And, you know, Eddie, unfortunately, his time was cut way too short. And unfortunately passed away at the age of 38. And, you know, I was reminiscing with my buddy Steve because I guess what we'll do here is I will give you guys some backstory as to, you know, where I was when I heard the news of Eddie's passing. And then from there, kind of, I guess, the lasting impact of his passing. And then we'll share some good memories and some of my favorite Eddie Guerrero moments and matches. And I encourage you guys to please do the same. I'd love to hear some of your memories. I've enjoyed going on Twitter and scouring and hearing people talk about Eddie, because at the end of the day, he's one of my favorite wrestlers. And so I was hoping this would be kind of more of a tribute video. We can look back fondly and smile at it, you know, as we think back to one of the greats in the history of pro wrestling. So, again, November 13th, 2005, I remember I had just dropped my girlfriend off at the time off at the Grand Central Station in New York City. It's a huge, probably the biggest train station in all of New York City, right up there, either that or Penn Station. I'm not 100% sure, but I think Grand Central Terminal is bigger than that, and just this huge place, 5 million people everywhere, and dropped off my girlfriend, said goodbye, and then I was walking back to leave and head back over to the subway to get back on the train to Penn Station and back here to Queens, New York. And just then it hit me. My buddy Steve, who you guys have seen here on this channel, sent me a text, and you know, no ifs, ands, or buts, no beating around the bush. It just said Eddie Guerrero passed away, and it was the craziest, it's the most surreal moment, I think, for me as a wrestling fan. Obviously, you know, it's right up there, I'd say, with the Owen Hart tragedy. And the Owen Hart tragedy is way different because Owen Hart was, you know, a young, healthy man who, you know, because of a stunt gone awry, you know, was taken way too soon from us. And I think that in looking back at that, you know, that was a different type of sadness than, you know, Eddie Guerrero's passing. Because for me, and I remember, I stood in the middle of Grand Central Terminal, and I just looked around, and it felt like everything stopped. I don't know why. I don't even know. I didn't remember anything else except for the fact that, like, I stood there in stunned silence. Like, this couldn't be. Like, Eddie Guerrero was one of these guys who overcame his demons. We had watched the Cheating Life, the Cheating, Death, Stealing Life documentary DVD set, and I remember having that one. It was just such a great story about Eddie Guerrero kind of beating the odds and overcoming his demons and working his way back to WWE. And I remember, well, I won't get into memories. We'll say that for a bit, but I mean, it felt like Eddie had succeeded. You know, he was back with Vicky, and he had you know, children with her, and he was back with his kids, and felt great. And then at the end of the day, unfortunately, for whatever reason, just ended up passing away, and I'll never forget it. It was crazy, and I felt terrible, and still do, just filled with sadness just thinking about it. But what was really, I remember the interesting piece about it, because yesterday was 15-year anniversary of the Eddie Guerrero Tribute Show, and you think about that, I know they always say the show must go on, and being in business, I understand the idea that, like, hey, the machine doesn't stop, and I get that. But, man, you think about how difficult this had to be for many of Eddie Guerrero's peers and friends, that Eddie Guerrero, if I'm not mistaken, if I remember the story correctly, they'd wrestled a show on Sunday, and then Eddie Guerrero went back to his hotel room and passed away. And so you think about that, or maybe it was Saturday into Sunday. They were definitely wrestling on that weekend, and then you get to the point where now everybody who's wrestled with this guy, he's a good friend of theirs, he's a locker room comrade, so to speak, and then you think about the idea that, like, they just had to keep going, and the next day, boom, they're back at Raw. Like, there's nobody to stop, and it obviously had a major impact on Chris Benoit, if you watch that tribute show, and I watched some of the tribute show today, and it's a nice show, I'll be honest. It's meaningful, It's very nice. Vince McMahon comes across incredibly genuine, as crazy as some of you may find that. He really does. He comes across very well during this tribute show. But Benoit is a total mess, and it really does make you think and make you wonder about him a bit. No one could have predicted how he'd end up less than 2 years later, but he really took that death hard, and you can see how much he's just completely, Triple H is trying to console him, everyone's trying to console him, but he's really just a complete mess, and it's like, maybe these guys needed a day or two to let this process, take the rest of the week off, show highlights, do the Eddie tribute, but just show highlights of Eddie Guerrero's matches, similarly to how they did when Benoit passed away, when they did the Benoit tribute, where, there were people who gave some thoughts on Benoit, but it was interspersed with his matches. There wasn't any show, so to speak. It just happened there. And I'll never forget, there was something where, I think it was on WWE.com, Vince McMahon and Chavo Guerrero were in the ring to break the news, middle of the day for Raw, to break the news that Eddie Guerrero had passed away. I think it was like a press conference or something like that. Chavo Guerrero had basically announced that he was getting rid of the Kerwin White character. If you remember that ridiculous character that he would think wouldn't stand a chance to be around today in 2020. But he kind of denounced that character and said, I can't do this anymore. I'm going to, go back to my roots and be Chavo Guerrero again, due to the death of Eddie. But it was surreal just to think that, like, it just kept going. I can't imagine. I mean, it looked like these guys definitely needed some time to let this process. And, I know they could say some people grieve differently, and maybe continuing this was good for some people because it just took their mind off it. But, man, it's tough to even think about and go back to. But, yeah, the Eddie Guerrero Tribute Show is a nice watch if you're ever in the mood to just kind of look back and smile and think of Eddie Guerrero. It's heartbreaking, but a lot of his peers clearly meant a ton to his peers, and you could really see that in that video. As far as Eddie Guerrero, to me, even before this, just to kind of get into some of my favorite moments and matches, he was always someone that I was kind of aware of in WCW. I was never a big WCW fan. I think my parents kind of raised me like, hey, if you love WWE, that's fine, but you better not even start with any of this WCW stuff because we'll already have your WWE pay-per-view, but we're not going to start with other pay-per-views. It's going to be too expensive. So they were like, you like WWE, and that's all you like. So I was very much kind of on that WWE path. But I knew of Eddie, and I kind of really enjoyed his stuff with the LWO, some of his matches. Obviously, the great, incredible match, Halloween Havoc 1997 with Eddie with Rey Mysterio. They absolutely tore it up. And then he comes to WWE as a part of the Radicals, and is kind of positioned maybe a notch below Chris Benoit at first. But really, his rise and his matches, there with China and the stuff he did with China, I thought was just so entertaining, and you got to see kind of that entertaining side of Eddie. And before long, unfortunately, his demons did get the better of him, and he was sent out to leave WWE and had to work his way back in. And I'll never forget, I went and I sat front row for Eddie Guerrero versus Low Ki at ICW. For those who don't know ICW, this is not the Insane Championship Wrestling from, I think it's Ireland, potentially. It's from the UK. And it's not that ICW. It's Impact Championship Wrestling run by Jack Sabbath. Jack is the owner of the Wrestling Universe, which has kind of rose to prominence over the last few years, thanks to the Major Wrestling Figure podcast. And I remember watching this match, and Low Ki beats Eddie Guerrero. And they announced Eddie will be back, but Eddie was already back in WWE by the time the next show came around. But Eddie actually wrote about this match in his book. First off, incredible match. And I remember just being stunned that like a local guy like Low Ki defeated Eddie Guerrero. And Eddie wrote in his book about how before the match, Jack Sabbath kind of came to him, the owner, and said, hey, is it okay with you if we have you guys work to a draw? And Eddie said, well, why would you have us work to a draw? Like, I'm the star here, I should be putting over your guy so that he could be seen on my level. And did that for Low Ki. And you think about that, like that probably was one of the things that really got Low Ki to that next level, to eventually get his own WWE run, and has been a very successful run on the independents, even aside from his run in WWE. So interesting to think back to, and I'm glad I kind of got to see him in that intimate setting. But then when he came back to WWE, I mean, this guy was just a top performer, man. He was on fire. He was so entertaining. I'll never forget the "Ala de se." That's like one of my favorite interviews. I don't remember necessarily who he did it with, but when I think he was forced to apologize, and then he said, when I apologized, "Ala de se," and I thought that was so much fun. So, a lot of his stuff was so entertaining. The stuff with Chavo and those vignettes they did as Los Guerreros. I was there for Survivor Series 2002, one of my favorites. It was Los Guerreros winning the tag titles, defeating Edge and Rey Mysterio, as well as Benoit and Angle, that SmackDown 6 era, where Eddie was an integral part of it, having great matches with Edge, having great matches up and down the card on the SmackDown side of things. And then, of course, eventually, after he had kind of exhausted different opportunities in the tag team division, would go on to a singles run. And eventually, thankfully, got a chance to be towards the top of the card, defeating Brock Lesnar. And I'll never forget, I didn't order No Way Out 2004. I'm glad that I was very young at the time, and my father really didn't order No Way Out 2004. And I remember my father said, well, you know you've got Goldberg and Lesnar, so no way are they going to have Lesnar lose the belt to Eddie Guerrero. It just doesn't make any sense, and I don't really want to see Lesnar beat Eddie. I like Eddie. So we didn't order the show. And then I remember, like, the news broke that Eddie won the title, and we were just like, what? You've got to be kidding. Egg on all of our faces for not ordering the show, because it is such a great moment. Eddie wins the title and then just, like, jumps into the crowd and is just adored by the fans. Everyone's so happy for him. And he was the top of the card for the remainder of his run. He was a top guy. I think he's really instrumental, certainly in getting over the JBL character, the extent it got over, certainly in really getting over Batista's character as much as it got over towards the end of Batista's run there, as Batista was kind of transitioning into the top of the SmackDown side of things as the champion. And he was just, it was just great. You know, it was so cool to see that moment, WrestleMania 20, of course, where he retains the title. He comes out with Benoit. They embrace, they hug, and obviously now I know, with all the stuff that went on with Benoit, it's really an odd watch and an odd rewatch. But this is something that it's really, in a way, it makes you feel like that moment, if you take away all the stuff that happened with Benoit, that was really a top WrestleMania moment of all time. These two guys who were told maybe they were too small worked their way over from WCW into WWE and were able to go ahead and do so and to reach the top and the pinnacle at the WrestleMania 20, a show they built up for a year. 20 years in the making, obviously, at Madison Square Garden in the absolute height of his run in WWE and elsewhere. And, again, it's so sad. It was such a great story that Eddie was able to overcome these demons and been able to at least reclaim some of his life. And then for it to just tragically end, again, it's devastating. I still think to this day that he's missed. And, again, if you get a chance, go watch the tribute shows to Eddie Guerrero if you haven't done so in a while. I do think they're heartwarming. I know everything WWE did with Eddie Guerrero's passing afterwards is definitely frowned upon, rightfully so, and I'm not giving them any pass for any of that. But at least on those nights, I thought they were good. So, in any event, that's it for me. I think as I look back at Eddie Guerrero's run, I'd say, my favorite matches of his were definitely the stuff he did with the SmackDown 6, his win over Brock Lesnar, match with Kurt Angle at WrestleMania 20, match where he fought Edge, I think, on SmackDown, and it was a ladder was involved, really good stuff. So many great matches. You can go on all day, but I want to hear from you. Let me know what some of your favorite Eddie Guerrero matches and moments were, and let's all smile and, think about Eddie Guerrero in such great lengths here as we remember him 15 years after his tragic passing.